talk to your kids about sex? I'm Dr. Carol. Thank you for joining me on this episode. That question is one that a lot of parents struggle with. You want your kids or teenagers to know the right things about sex, and God's design for that, and yet you may not know how to do it or feel squeamish or uncomfortable about doing it. Well, I have a special guest on the program today that will help you with that. Kristen Miele has been a sex educator for like 12 years, teaching about sex, a deep Christian, and she has done a great lot of work at bringing the health issues, the biology, and the Christian perspective, God's design for this whole thing that we call sex, and putting all that together. I am just fascinated by Kristen and some of the work that she has been doing. Sex Ed Reclaimed is a whole bunch of curriculum that she has prepared. But in this conversation, I'm going to talk to Kristen about why you should care about sex ed and why you should be the sex educator for your children and what that can look like and how to get over some of the tough questions. So I know you'll enjoy this. Kristen Miele. Kristen Miele, this is going to be a fun conversation. First of all, thank you. Really appreciate you reaching out to me and then that this time worked out.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for connecting and thanks for having me here.
Yeah. This is a topic that I know our listening viewers are concerned about, but they may not think it's so easy to talk about. Well, we're going to talk about it, and that is sex ed.
Yes.
First of all, maybe just a moment or two about your story. How did you get into sex ed?
Yeah. Well, when I was 5, I was like, I really want to be a sex ed teacher when I get older. No,
Yeah.
just kidding. No, never wanted to be a sex ed teacher. I don't know any sex ed teachers who are like, yep, that was my lifelong dream. I got into public health. I studied public health in college, and then I also did a graduate degree, have my master's of science in public health. And really, I grew up as a Christian, and I saw a lot of overlap between public health, community health, and sharing the gospel. And I wanted to go on the mission field as well. And so I just saw a lot of pertinence, like a lot of relationship there. And as I was studying. I started grad school and I didn't know how I was going to pay for grad school. So I was really in prayer about that. As I was praying, it was one of those prayer requests that like I prayed and literally within that weekend, I had an answer to prayer. And the school emailed me and said, "Hey, could you teach at our school while you're learning here for your graduate degree? We'll pay basically for your graduate degree." And I thought, "Oh, this is perfect. This is totally my answer from prayer. Literally, God wants me to do this." Well, I thought I was going to be teaching introduction to public health, but what I was teaching was human sexuality, and I was terrified. I had a wonderful church growing up, and I have wonderful, amazing parents, but that was not a topic we discussed.
Yeah.
Much at all. And so I just didn't know if it was even right or good or holy to talk about it. And as I began the job, because I really didn't have too much of a choice, I couldn't get into another class. I was terrified. And actually, my reviews after my first semester from students said that like she seemed pretty uncomfortable at the beginning of the
Yeah.
semester. And I was the only teacher. I mean, I was a TA, so to speak, but I was the only teacher. There was no one else there. And I just had this kind of moment where I was like, what am I doing? Like, if God led me to this, he must have had a reason. And really started to look into the Bible. I really started to look into resources that were out there, which it didn't feel like there were a ton, even at that time, which wasn't that long ago. And I felt this renewal of like, oh my gosh, this is God's topic. Like, this is God's world. He created sex and he created it to be a blessing and a gift. But his people have gone astray, and we live in rebellion. We live with these fleshly desires, and we've made it something it was not supposed to be. And I started to teach with a new passion and a new love, and students saw that, and my reviews kept coming back really, really well. Like they were coming back with good reviews. And so as I went forward, I worked for a health department after that. I got married. I thought back, like, what do I love doing? I love teaching sexual health. And so I got back into it, and I started teaching in about 60 locations for people who did not want to talk about it
Yes.
or needed somebody to help. And I loved it. And most of those settings were secular. But I very much, like through the grace of God and the Holy Spirit, I think was able to weave truth into those talks. And it was really good. I love sex ed, but that is completely the Lord, which maybe people out there don't know that, but God uses sex ed teachers and he loves sex ed teachers and he loves his creation. And so yes, there are bad sex ed teachers, so to speak, and there are sex ed teachers with very different agendas, but they're also Christians. And I love this topic and I love talking to kids about this topic. So totally God.
That's got to be, because for most of our audience who are Christians, and for a lot of the Christian church at large, or a significant segment of the population in our country at large, sex ed has kind of become a hot, bad topic.
Yes.
Where do you see the disconnect? I'm sure that you're in a different generation from me, and I'm sure you've got friends and talked with, parents or whatever. What do you think is the biggest disconnect between sex ed the way God would have it and sex ed, if I can use this term, the way the world does it in our culture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the biggest disconnect is the truth. If you have no real like purpose for what you're teaching other than that you want to educate, which isn't a bad goal, right? You want to educate or you want to help, but help is very much in your terms and what that means to you,
Yeah.
then it's going to look a little bit disjointed and it's going to look very different. I know a lot of people that are in the sex ed world or in the sex ed spaces, and basically they feel that they're righting wrong, that sex ed was never great for them, it wasn't helpful. Maybe they're in the LGBTQ community and they really felt like sex ed never saw them, and so now they're teaching it and they want to do it their way and they want to help kids who are like them. And a lot of people do have good intention with that, but they do have their own agendas and they do have their own reasons for doing so. We all have reasons. We all have something we're living for. And to be honest, I think a lot of sex ed teachers are probably living for their own glory, just like others. They're living for their own purposes, and the truth is relative. And you do you, like you do you, and there's so much greatness in that. But the truth is that when we do us, we end up in a lot of difficult places. We end up with a lot of consequences of our sin. We end up seeking fulfillment in things that will never fulfill us. We end up looking for identity in something that can't give us identity.
Yeah.
And so you end up lost. And that's where the world's at, like pretty obviously to many Christians, right? The world is very lost. I've been there as well, but they're teaching out of that narrative, whereas I am teaching out of the narrative. And my prayer is that I'm teaching out of the narrative of God's design, his purpose for sexuality, and his design for us as his children in our sexual selves. Like, we're made this way. And so what does that mean for us?
Yeah.
That's how I'm teaching.
You've alluded to this already, but let me just ask it specifically. Information always has something behind it. Facts, facts are okay, and any of us can learn or present facts. But what do you think should be the purpose of sex ed?
This is a great question. What is the purpose of sex ed? Well, if I'm answering as a Christian, which I am, the purpose of sex ed is to glorify the creator of sex. Like that is what I say. And I mean it. A lot of people who I've worked with in sex ed would disagree with me, because that's not how they see the world. That's not their view of God, or they're really not following God. But I know, like, I am so sure that it is for the glory of God. I really believe, and I think it's pretty clear in the scriptures, that God created sex to glorify him and to glorify the Trinity. And so that is what I think the purpose of sex ed is, which is not how most of the world views sex ed. They certainly probably don't even think of the word God or his glory when they think of sex ed, but it's possible and it's real.
That's good. You have done a lot of work in recent months producing and making available Sex Ed Reclaimed, and we'll talk about that. But a couple things I noticed as I was looking through some of your material, you talk about starting, I mean, really young, like 3, like toddlers. What in the world would sex ed for toddlers? Why? What should that look like?
Yeah. Sex ed for toddlers is lots of fun. I have a 4-year-old, so I have a child myself who's kind of in this stage, and I actually just posted on the social media account for Sex Ed Reclaimed her actually viewing the curriculum. Like she does the curriculum, which technically I could just teach her it myself, and I do that, but I have her go through it too. Like, I mean, just I want to see how it goes for her, and she kind of piloted it for me. What it looks like for a 4-year-old is very different than what it looks like for a 15-year-old. But the great thing when you start young is that, and I've heard this in a previous podcast of yours too, but when you start young, it really just starts the discourse. It starts the dialogue for the rest of their life. And so by the time they're 15, if you started when they were 2 or 3 or 4, it's natural and it's easy. It's organic. They're comfortable with you. They're coming to you with this question of this thing they saw on TikTok that was really weird and very sexual, instead of just dealing with it themselves and kind of covering it up and talking to their friends and Googling it, because they've been talking to you since they were 2 about their penis or vagina or whatever. And so what it looks like for a little kid is it looks like naming body parts. It looks like recognition of what the body's for. How do we clean it? What do we clean it for? Who should be touching you in the bathroom? And why? And why is it only safe with mommy and daddy or grandma or whomever versus other people? It looks like teaching respect, body safety. It looks like good secrets, bad secrets, differentiating between, for a young kid, like what is a bad secret? If somebody tells you they've hurt somebody and they tell you to keep it a secret, is that good or bad? Yeah. Kind of getting in touch with your feelings a little bit. And I don't say that in like a wishy-washy, like get in touch with your feelings way, but I want my 4-year-old to note that when she's really uncomfortable and feels yucky, there's probably a reason for it. And so she can come to me and talk to me about that. And if it's a certain person that makes her feel that way, we're going to kind of explore that a little bit and press into that. Even though she's only 4, so to speak, she can start to recognize healthy coping ways to deal with her feelings. And I will say I've gotten a little bit of pushback, like, is that really sex ed? And it is. Body safety, knowing the parts of your body, knowing, basically starting to help them understand abuse before they could ever understand what that really is. That is part of sexual health education. My curriculum is very robust because I believe sex ed actually is really robust. There's so many nuances and complications in it and challenges, but I see them all as opportunities. And I love talking about this kind of stuff with her. I mean, she's asked me where babies come from. I told her there's an ingredient from daddy, ingredient from mommy. When they meet up, makes a baby. Okay, cool. I'm going to go play. That is the sex ed talk with a 4-year-old. She knows the names of her body parts and she knows what's appropriate and what's not. She knows about keeping her clothes on. I talk about when is it appropriate to have your clothes off, because that's hard for 3-year-olds. So it looks different than it does for a teenager student of mine, but it still is there.
You're assuming that parents are part of this. You kind of talked that way. It's certainly that, in more public settings, schools or whatever, it's not that sex ed can't be there, but talk about parents in all of this.
Yeah. I love the idea of parents being a safe, trustworthy source of information about sex. I love that. And I love, I'm just going to put this out there, the idea that people would say, I learned about sex from the church and from my parents, and they did a really great job. I've never heard that said before. And I would love for that to be true in like 10, 15, 20 years. And I think that it can be. My generation, who is raising young people now and having kids of their own, like, I think that they, by and large, really want to talk to their kids about sex. We all were confronted with porn as, young people. The internet was coming of age. We have our own experiences with that and our own trauma, our own stories. And I think much of my generation really, and I'm in my 30s, really wants to talk to their kids, and the generation like underneath me, like in their 20s, really want to talk to their own children about sex. It's just that they don't really know how, because they've never seen it modeled. Or maybe they only know how to have one type of talk, but they don't really know how to talk about LGBTQ stuff or masturbation or identity, gender identity. Like, how do you talk about that? And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't know how to talk about that either, except for God has really, prepared me in this specific sense because of my work in sex ed for the last decade plus. But I would love for kids to one day say, I learned about sex from my parents and they did a really good job. And part of that is not because of the actual words that you say when your kid comes to you with a question, but it is because of this standard you set where they can always approach you and you have not necessarily the right answer, but you'll find out and you'll talk to them about it. And you're so glad that they asked, kind of thing. That's really what I want. I want parents to be involved. I think that parents already want to be involved.
Yeah.
They just aren't sure exactly how. And that's really the population I'm trying to reach. The person who is still convinced they don't need to talk to their kid about sex, at this point, I kind of feel like I'll maybe get to them a little bit later. Because I mean, current events, like, they speak for themselves.
Yep.
So.
Yeah, that's good. You've mentioned a couple things that make me think that children are being sexually discipled. They are learning about sex. Where do you want them learning about it? TikTok, their seatmate on the school bus if they're going to school,
Exactly.
Whatever, porn.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kristen, talk about porn, by the way. How do you approach that in the curriculum, and what's your perspective on porn and kids?
Yeah. I think porn is the biggest sex educator, period. I think porn is also a really lazy form of sex. What I mean by that is it's just not true. It's not real. It's fraught with just disaster and lies and abuse. And how would you know that if you're 10 and you're seeing it for the first time?
Right.
How would you know that if you're 18 and you've been watching for a few years and you just believe that this is how it is? And, research studies tell us that kids believe it, that they believe it's real, just like in a way, just like my 4-year-old, when she watches a Disney movie, thinks that princesses in the movie are real people right now. And it's like, no, honey, Cinderella's a movie. But, you see things and you think that they're real. And so porn is the biggest sex educator of all generations right now, basically. It's the way people access information about sex, and it is wrong. And I don't mean that it's morally wrong, although I do believe that. It is incorrect information. It is not true. It is not a realistic picture of sex. It is not a realistic picture of women and men and what a sexual relationship can look like and what beauty really is. It's so full of lies. I really hate porn, and I really hate what it's doing to people. I hate what it does to the actors and the testimonies and the stories I hear from people who are in porn, whether they're Christian or not. And I hate what it does to the viewer and the watcher. I think it's just going to ruin marriages and it's going to ruin families. And so I speak against porn in my curriculum in all age groups, because when they're little, I call it bad pictures or like bad images. And I give them kind of a little game plan of what to do, little meaning that it's short, of what to do when they see something that makes them uncomfortable, or when somebody gives them a device and there's something yucky on it, like there's something that makes them scared, or maybe there's naked people on it. That shouldn't be a picture that they see. And so what can they do? I give steps for them. And I also have parent videos available in each curriculum so that parents can watch and learn exactly, what I'm talking about. Parents can obviously screen every video where I talk about porn or whatever topic. So I'm really passionate about speaking against porn because I do think it's the biggest sex educator, and I think it's just going to ruin lives. It already is. It already has, as we well know. But I talk to kids about addiction. I talk to them about what's happening in their brain when they view it. I talk to them about what it really is, the truth about it. I talk to them about how it's giving them a picture of women and relationship. I talk to them about what God says about who we are as people and how special and unique and precious we are, and how porn doesn't like subscribe to any of that. Porn doesn't care about you. Porn doesn't care about God. Porn only cares about, making money. And how corrupt really the business is. I talk to teens about that, but with young kids, I really just talk about what to do if you see a bad picture. Yeah.
I've seen some staggering numbers about how many kids are exposed to porn. And I talk with a lot of people who have struggled with porn for years
Yeah.
and realize now finally the damage that's done, and getting away from it is so hard. So helping kids be
Yes.
equipped, and helping parents of young kids be equipped, or school age kids or teens be
Yeah.
equipped to deal with it. Yeah, that's a big deal.
It is. And it's saying it's an important topic is an understatement, because if porn is the biggest sex educator, and if your Christian kids or non-Christian kids will, if you know your neighbor will be whomever, like fill in the blank, sees this and is consuming this, then they are going to have new ideas about what sex is and what women and men are. And that is going to change how they treat people, how they think about people, and how they look at relationships. It just is. It doesn't matter if they don't want that to happen or if they know that porn's bad somewhere in their brain. They need to really delve into why. And I think there's a lot of people fighting porn now. And so that's great. And even secular kind of celebrities are speaking out about what porn did to their life, and you know their disdain for porn now. But we as Christians need to be speaking about it pretty loudly and honestly as well, because we know the truth and we know the beauty of our God and of the body and of sex. And so we want to be a prominent voice in our children's ears.
Yeah. A topic that's a bit touchy, and I honestly don't know, Kristen, what you're going to say about this. And that's the topic of masturbation for kids and teens. How do you, first of all, how do you think about it? And how do you talk to kids about it?
Yeah, good question. When they're little, I talk about touching your body and like when it's appropriate, because a question I get a lot just as a person in sex ed is, you know, my 3-year-old, my 2-year-old is touching themselves, or they're kind of rubbing this area, or, you know, they have a stuffy that they put down there and, oh my gosh, I can't believe they're already doing this. And I don't know what to do. And this is so overwhelming. Totally understand that. But they're not masturbating, right? They're not seeking out sexual gratification by doing this thing, but that part of their body has nerve endings, and it feels good, and it's this soothing tactic for them, you know, not totally dissimilar to like sucking their thumb or something else. And so I really try to assuage their fear, like calm them down, and say, this is not like we are putting the shame on that, we are putting our fears on that. And what you're seeing is not what is actually happening. And so I talk to kids about appropriate places for things. Like I mentioned earlier, when should your clothes be off? When should they be on? And who around? If you have an itch down there, is it okay to scratch, and how? And I even talk about germs, you know, because I do have a public health background. Scratching over your pants in a private area versus under, and you know, I even mentioned something like, do adults put their hands down their pants? You know, do you see them with their hands down their pants out in public, you know, at church, at school, around the house? No. So should we be doing that? No. Like this is a place that germs can get in. It can make you sick. And so I really take that approach with little kids, talking about their body and what's appropriate and what's not, because kids aren't 5-year-olds are not seeking to like go masturbate.
Right.
You know, they don't even have the knowledge of that yet. It's adults who kind of ascribe that to them, and ascribe that to what they're seeing. But with 10 and up, I really talk about masturbation a bit more openly. So I talk about how it's often paired with fantasy, sexual fantasy, or pornography, especially as like I get older in the curriculum. Like in my 14 to 18-year-old group, I definitely talk about how that's often paired with masturbation, and how God is very clear that that is not his design for sex, that pornography is not a part of his design, that it's not good for us, that it's not healthy, that sexual fantasy actually really does nothing for us, that it's very self-focused, that it separates us from, like I gave an example, like with a spouse, you know, if you're sexually fantasizing about somebody else while you're with your spouse, this is not a good sign for your relationship. This is not healthy. This is not what's holy and right. And that's something that you need to, it's a normal temptation and it's a normal thing, but like you need to talk about that with your spouse, and you need to dig into why that's happening and what you guys can do about that. And so for teens, because masturbation is so connected to fantasy and porn, I really focus on that more. And this might be controversial for some people, but like nowhere in the Bible does it say masturbation is a sin, like, Exodus 8:7 or something. I mean, we can read a story about a man spilling his seed, but we see in that story that really it's about him being disobedient to God, wanting him to further his line, through. And so, I'm not going to like make up scripture that isn't there or say something that's not from the Bible. But like, is masturbation good for us? I believe there's a lot of pitfalls in masturbation, that it really isn't furthering us to know the Lord more and to glorify his name more. But is it a very real temptation that all of us experience? Absolutely. Like, people struggle with that. And so I also kind of normalize the temptation, because it is normal. It doesn't mean you're an awful person and that God hates you because you are interested in masturbation. But kids might think that, they might, or they might get that idea from somewhere. So I even talk about prayer and how we can pray about these things too, and talk to God about them.
I really appreciate how you are bringing God into all of this, not in a shame way, you've got to do this or not do that. It's that pointing toward the purpose for which God made our bodies and our souls and our relationship,
Yes.
That's really, really a great perspective. And focusing on the porn and fantasy thing. When I am asked about masturbation, I always give what I sometimes say is a squishier answer than many people think should be there, because scripture doesn't give a black and white, and we need to be cautious there. And it's a lot more about what is it connected to, what is its place in your life, rather than the exact physical piece of it.
Yeah. And if God has marriage, in your life at some point, is masturbation going to further your intimacy with your husband or wife? No.
It's not.
I mean, there's a knowledge of your body, and I do very much in anatomy. My anatomy lessons talk about the body and its purpose. I mean, the clitoris was created for pleasure, and that's from God. Like, that's a great, wonderful, beautiful thing that he did, that he made, and as he does, as the things he makes. But does that mean that I should be masturbating in my marriage? I mean, that's something that I encourage kids to think about, because if this is something where the last 10 years I've been doing this, and certainly I'm not hurting anybody, and did God say it was bad? Not exactly, so I can do it. Okay, well, let's further that. Like, what does that mean for my marriage? How is this helping intimacy in my relationship? Am I okay with my husband if my husband is doing that? And then, what are we masturbating to? I mean, you're usually masturbating to something. So I really try to get kids to critically think about that, and almost come to that understanding on their own, as they engage with the material I have.
Okay.
Yeah.
Where do you see Sex Ed Reclaimed? Where do you see these curricula being used?
I see it primarily being used in the home. I see it as being used as part of a homeschooling curriculum, or like a co-op with individual families or groups. I definitely could see it being used in youth group as lessons that a youth group does, or as almost like an extra thing that kids could sign up for as part of being in youth group. But I also see, in the church setting, I also see it in Christian schools. I think very much this could be a part of health curriculum in Christian schools. I have samples, and I am very much willing to send to people who work in school settings or in church settings and are like, okay, this sounds great and I'm interested, but I'm not totally sure on everything she says. That's okay. I can send you it. Like, let me know. I mean, I have 80 topics I talk about, so it's a lot, but I am happy to send along samples to people, because I want them to be comfortable with the material and understand what I'm saying and where I'm coming from. So I primarily see it used in those three spaces: church, school, and home.
Okay. All right. I think home makes the most sense. And I love your focus that parents should be the ones who are educating their kids about sex and everything related. Yep. We'll make sure links are available under this video or in the show notes if you're listening to the audio. But just a moment to invite people to connect with you. Where do they go, Kristen, if they want to find out more?
Yeah, so I am at sexedreclaimed.com. Sexedreclaimed.com is my website. I have a contact form through that. And I am also very accessible on social media. I'm on TikTok and Instagram and, LinkedIn, kind of those types of spaces. And it's always Sex Ed Reclaimed. And I am actually happy Dr. Carol, and I will send you this. Happy to send you a discount code for your followers or your listeners, so that they can get the curriculum for cheaper. I would love to offer, just offer them 20% off, and so that they can have better access to get whatever they need.
We'll be happy to share that coupon code with you. Thank you, Kristen. Yeah, that was a bonus. I didn't know that was coming.
Yeah,
So
I didn't tell you about that.
we'll be very, very happy to let our listeners know about that. Thanks so much, Kristen. Blessings on you, your family, your work, and starting early to get these kinds of messages into young people's minds. I can just imagine the kind of difference that's going to make in their future. So important. Because you don't want them to grow up with first of all, just simply wrong information or unnecessary shame. There's enough going on in our world around sex and stuff that, if you can preempt that as a parent or as a Christian leader, a teacher or whatever, and help equip children so that they have some truth to combat what will come at them. Oh, wow. It makes such a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, parents have good intentions. They do want to disciple their kids and they want to lead them, but you can disciple your kids in this field too. This is not, don't be like me as a grad student, like, is this even God's topic? Is this even right to talk about? No, like that, like it 100% is right to talk about it. God was the first one to utter anything about sex into the world. He created it. And so it's right and holy and good to talk about.
Okay. Well, thanks a bunch. We'll have to stay in touch, and many blessings to you.
Thank you, Dr. Carol.
Whoa, yes, you can talk about this. sexedreclaim.com, and check the links under this video. And as Kristen mentioned, which was such a pleasant surprise in this conversation, she's making a promo code available. It's Dr. Carol, DRCAROL. Check that underneath this video as well. And you can use that promo code when getting any of the curriculum, and you get a discount. I was just really grateful. I didn't even know that was coming. Under this video also, we'll share the link to an article on my website, Kids, Technology, and Sex, What You Need to Know. Some resources there, some of my thoughts about kids and technology and sex. And as a parent or somebody who cares about kids, I think you'll find that helpful at all as well. I'd love to know what you think. Leave a comment or a question under this video. That means a lot. That's just, I know what you're thinking about when you watch this. And if you have a confidential comment that you want to leave, you can use the contact page on our website, drcarolministries.com, and that comes to me confidentially. Do subscribe to this channel so that you can get this material when we put something up, usually every week. Thank you again, and until next time, may God bless you.